Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to dive into a world where the impossible seems, well, tantalizingly close.
Mm.
Our subject is Gustavo Adolfo Rol,
Well,
a 20th century Italian figure who was, depending on who you ask,
right.
either an incredibly skilled illusionist
Mm.
or someone who genuinely possessed abilities that defied the laws of nature.
What's fascinating about Varolz is that he wasn't some mysterious recluse.
Right.
He's a respected figure from a wealthy family,
Okay.
held degrees in law and economics, and was a talented painter and antiquarian.
Interesting.
Yet woven into this seemingly ordinary life were these persistent whispers of the extraordinary.
Okay.
We're talking about alleged paranormal phenomena,
Right.
witnessed not just by close friends, but also acquaintances and even some prominent figures of the time.
And to try to understand this enigma, we've got excerpts from 2 articles on Huppages,
Okay.
A Challenge to Reason, Gustavo Rol and his Prodigies, and Gustavo Rol, a 20th century wizard. We'll also be looking at some material from a website called Gustavo Adolfo Rol the Enlightened.
Mm.
I have to say, I'm really curious to see what you make of all this.
Well, the first thing that strikes you when you delve into Rol is the sheer breadth of his reported abilities,
Okay.
which he referred to as possibilities.
Right.
There are accounts of him demonstrating clairvoyance, knowing things beyond normal perception,
Okay.
telekinesis, moving objects with his mind,
Yeah.
and even more mind-boggling feats like materialization and dematerialization of objects.
Now, I know some of those terms might sound like something straight out of a science fiction novel.
Right.
So let's break down a few of them.
Okay.
For example, doubling,
Right.
which is described in the sources as Rol's ability to appear in 2 places at once.
Yeah.
It sounds incredible, but if we take it at face value,
Sure.
what kind of mechanisms could even allow for something like that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And it's important to remember we're dealing with anecdotal accounts. So skepticism is definitely warranted.
Sure.
But if we entertain the possibility for a moment,
Yeah.
doubling would seem to challenge our understanding of physical presence and perhaps even the nature of consciousness itself.
Okay. And then there's transfer or agility,
Yeah.
which the sources describe as moving objects or information across space instantaneously.
Right.
Is this similar to teleportation, or is there a different nuance here?
It seems distinct from teleportation as we typically understand it.
Okay.
Imagine, for instance, being able to instantly transfer the contents of a book from a library in another country into your mind.
Oh, wow.
That's the kind of phenomenon the sources are hinting at with transfer or agility.
That's just wild.
Yeah.
And, it's not just the variety of these reported abilities that's intriguing.
Right.
It's the context in which they allegedly occurred.
Okay.
Let's talk about the story from World War II,
Sure.
where Rol is said to have saved the lives of 3 men accused of being partisan fighters.
Yes, that's one of the more compelling anecdotes. The sources describe Rol intervening on behalf of these men who were facing execution by a German commander in San Secondo di Pinerolo when challenged to prove their innocence.
Right.
Rol supposedly described the contents of the commander's desk drawers in his home in Hamburg.
And he was accurate.
Yes.
I mean, specific details, not just general descriptions.
According to the sources, Rol described the contents with remarkable detail,
Wow.
even mentioning confidential letters that the commander was certain only he knew about. The officer was understandably astonished.
Yeah.
This led to Rol offering to provide even more proof that evening, and remarkably, the next day, the 3 men were released.
Now, if this is true, it raises so many questions.
Right.
Was this an example of clairvoyance? Remote viewing,
Yeah.
or could there be another explanation?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this particular incident?
Well, it's tempting to jump to the most extraordinary explanation,
Sure.
but it's crucial to consider alternative possibilities.
Yeah.
Could this have been a case of incredibly well-placed informants, or perhaps some form of elaborate deception? The sources don't provide enough detail to definitively rule anything out.
You're right. We have to be careful not to let our fascination with the paranormal cloud our judgment.
Right.
But at the same time, it's hard to ignore the sheer number of these seemingly impossible events attributed to Rol. And they weren't all life or death situations.
Yes.
There's that rather chilling story about Count Sini and the actress Merle Oberon.
Yes. In 1949,
Okay.
Rol was at the Hotel du Cap in France with Sidi and Oberon. He reportedly experienced a sudden premonition of danger, a feeling of something burning.
Oh, wow.
and urged them not to take a planned flight to Venice the following day.
And this is where the story takes a tragic turn, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
Oberon, heeding Roll's warning,
Uh-huh.
decided to stay behind.
Right.
Cini, however, dismissed it and boarded the flight.
Okay.
The plane crashed, and he was killed.
It's a tragic story.
Yeah.
And it's hard not to wonder what might have been if Cini had listened to Roll's premonition.
Right.
But it also raises the question of free will. If
Yeah.
Roll genuinely foresaw Shimi's death, was it inevitable?
Right.
Or could it have been avoided?
There's a question that has haunted philosophers and theologians for centuries.
Yeah.
Does foreknowledge negate free will?
Mm.
Or is it simply a glimpse into one possible outcome?
Right.
A path that can be altered?
It's mind-boggling.
It is.
And then there's the story about the portrait of Teresa Rovere and her son
Yes.
that seemingly changed expression years after Roll's death.
Right, in 1977.
Okay.
Roll was visiting a friend's apartment where these portraits hung.
Uh-huh.
The story goes that there was a rumor about the son having been poisoned,
Okay.
and Roll's friend asked him about it.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the lower half of Teresa's portrait lifted off the wall,
What?
accompanied by a blue flash of light and a loud noise.
Wow.
Afterward, they found a message written on a piece of paper Roll had placed in a pocket beforehand.
And what did this message say?
It read in French,
Okay.
"My son was not poisoned. He died of a sudden intestinal infection."
Hmm.
What's even stranger is that years later, in 2002,
Right?
a TV crew filming a documentary about Roll in that same apartment
Uh-huh.
captured footage of Teresa's portrait seemingly changing expression.
Didn't a subtle smile appear on her face in the footage?
You're right.
I think I remember seeing those photos.
It's a small detail,
Yeah.
but it adds another layer of mystery
Yeah.
to an already bizarre event.
Right.
And this wasn't the only instance where people claimed to have witnessed paintings changing in Roll's presence.
Okay.
The film director, Federico Fellini, recounted a similar experience where a painting of two lovers
Yeah.
seemed to move closer and then apart as he and Roll were looking at it.
And didn't a dove suddenly appear in the next room when Fellini mentioned that the painting evoked a sense of peace within him? It's
Yeah.
like there was some sort of synchronicity at play, a responsiveness to thoughts or desires.
That's what's so intriguing about many of these accounts.
Yeah.
There's a sense of intentionality, as if these events weren't just random occurrences, but somehow connected to the people involved or the specific context of the situation.
And then we have accounts of objects appearing and disappearing.
Right.
Like the story Maria Luisa Giordano tells about Roll making hundreds of chestnuts appear after she casually mentioned them.
Okay.
How do we even begin to make sense of something like that?
That's where the line between reality and illusion gets really blurry. If we take these accounts at face value, they suggest a level of control over matter that defies our current scientific understanding.
It's tempting to just chalk it all up to trickery.
Sure.
But the sheer range and consistency of these stories,
Yeah.
coming from a variety of seemingly credible sources, makes it difficult to dismiss outright.
And that's where the real deep dive begins.
Oh.
We have to explore all possibilities, from the skeptical to the extraordinary.
Right.
We have to examine the evidence, weigh the arguments, and try to understand the man behind the mystery. Gustavo Adolfo Roll.
Yeah.
What motivated him? What were his beliefs?
Right.
And could those beliefs hold the key to unraveling this enigma?
This is where it gets really interesting. I'm
Yeah.
eager to hear your insights.
Okay, well, to understand Roll, you have to understand his worldview.
Okay.
From what I've gathered from these sources,
Right.
he was a devout Catholic and saw his possibilities as stemming from a spiritual source,
Okay.
not some supernatural power he could wield at will.
So it wasn't like he thought he was a magician pulling rabbits out of hats,
Right.
but rather tapping into something much deeper.
Exactly.
Okay.
He believed everything, even inanimate objects, possessed a spirit, with humans having a more intelligent spirit because of our consciousness. He saw this spirit as an ethereal memory containing all information about a person,
Okay.
and he claimed to access this through what he called sublime consciousness.
Hold on, ethereal memory. That's a pretty heady concept.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little more?
Think of it like this.
Okay.
Every experience, every thought, every bit of information you've ever encountered is imprinted on this ethereal record. Kind of like a cosmic hard drive specific to you.
Okay.
And Roll believed he could tap into this not just for people present,
Right.
but across time and space.
Okay, I'm starting to see where the transfer or agility thing might fit in.
Right.
But sublime consciousness,
Yeah.
that sounds almost mystical.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He described it as a state of heightened awareness,
Mm.
a union with something greater than oneself.
Okay.
It's interesting to consider this idea in light of other spiritual traditions
Right.
that talk about enlightenment or transcendental states.
So it wasn't about him controlling these abilities,
Right.
but rather being in this particular state of being, and then these things just happened.
That seems to be the gist of it.
Okay.
He often said he couldn't make his possibilities occur.
Mm-hmm.
They were more like gifts bestowed upon those around him,
Right.
often in response to a need or a question.
That actually makes his refusal of scientific testing even more understandable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If it wasn't something he could summon on demand,
Right.
how could he possibly replicate it in a controlled laboratory setting?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the mechanics of replication.
Mm.
Remember, Rol saw his possibilities as inherently spiritual.
Right.
Imagine trying to explain the feeling of awe you get looking at a starry sky through purely chemical reactions in your brain.
Yeah.
It gets lost in translation, right?
I get it. It's like trying to analyze a poem by breaking it down into its grammatical components.
Right.
You might understand the structure,
Mm.
but you lose the beauty and the meaning.
Precisely. And for Rol, scientific scrutiny might have felt like dissecting a butterfly to understand its flight. It misses the essence of what makes it so remarkable.
But that doesn't let him off the hook entirely, does it?
No.
Skeptics argue that his refusal to be tested only strengthens the idea that it was all an elaborate illusion.
Of course, that's a perfectly valid point.
Yeah.
And there are magicians who claim they can replicate many of Rol's feats using sleight of hand,
Right.
misdirection, and psychological suggestion.
But could stagecraft really account for everything? The sheer variety of his purported abilities, the consistency of the accounts over decades?
Yeah, it's tough.
And let's not forget the wartime stories.
Right.
Those seem particularly hard to explain away as mere tricks.
You're right.
Yeah.
Those are compelling counterpoints.
Mhm.
And that's what makes Rol so intriguing.
Right.
He occupies this liminal space between what we consider possible and impossible.
Yeah.
He forces us to confront the limitations of our current understanding of reality.
And there's another aspect we haven't touched on yet.
Okay.
Rol's character.
Right.
The sources consistently describe him as kind, generous, and ethical. Someone who used his possibilities to help others,
Yes.
never for personal gain.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
He actively avoided fame,
Right.
refused payment for his help, and was known for his charitable work.
Okay.
This isn't the typical profile of a charlatan seeking attention or fortune.
It actually makes the idea of him being a lifelong deceiver less plausible, doesn't it?
Right.
It's hard to imagine someone maintaining such a facade for decades
Yeah.
without some ulterior motive.
Exactly. And that leads us back to his spiritual beliefs. If he genuinely believes he was acting as a conduit for something greater than himself,
Right.
a force for good in the world,
Yeah.
then his actions align much more consistently with his stated worldview.
So we have this man who, according to numerous accounts, exhibited extraordinary abilities. He refused scientific testing, citing spiritual reasons, and claiming his abilities were not under his direct control.
Right.
And he lived a life of service, using these abilities to help others, and seemingly shunning any personal gain.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating puzzle, to say the least.
And a puzzle with far-reaching implications. Because if even a fraction of what's been attributed to Rol is true, it raises profound questions about human potential,
Yeah.
the nature of consciousness, and the limits of what we consider possible.
Now, I'm really starting to see why you find this case so fascinating. It's not just about magic tricks or paranormal phenomena. It's about exploring the very boundaries of what we believe is real.
That's what makes this deep dive so compelling.
Yeah.
It's a journey into the unknown,
Yeah.
a challenge to our preconceived notions, and an invitation to consider that reality might be far more expansive and mysterious than we currently imagine.
So where do we go from here? How do we reconcile the extraordinary claims with the lack of scientific proof?
Right.
And more importantly,
Yeah.
what can we as individuals glean from Rol's story? You know what's striking me is that the more we explore Gustavo Rol, the more the question of whether his abilities were like real,
Right.
it almost becomes secondary. It's the implications of his story,
Right.
the questions it raises about human potential and the nature of reality that are truly captivating.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
Even if we were to definitively prove or disprove every single anecdote about Roll, we'd still be left with these profound mysteries.
Right.
What if consciousness isn't just a byproduct of our brains, but something more fundamental?
Okay.
Something that can interact with the world in ways we're just beginning to grasp.
And if that's the case,
Right.
what does it mean for our understanding of things like free will, destiny,
Well-
even the nature of time itself? Roll's reported ability to see future events, for example, it directly challenges the linear way we typically think about time.
Exactly. And his concept of ethereal memory,
Right.
this idea that information about everything and everyone is stored somewhere,
Yeah.
accessible under certain conditions.
Right.
That's a concept that has echoes in various spiritual and philosophical traditions.
It makes you wonder if there are layers of reality we're typically blind to, aspects of existence that only reveal themselves
Right.
when we shift our perspective or access a different state of awareness.
Yeah,
Like
right.
maybe Roll wasn't doing anything supernatural,
Right.
but rather tapping into something that's always there, a potential within us all.
That's a fascinating possibility, isn't it?
It is.
What if these abilities aren't paranormal, but paranormal,
Okay.
meaning beyond our current understanding of what's normal?
Uh-huh.
It's like how 100 years ago,
Yeah.
the idea of instant communication across continents would have seemed like magic.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to Roll's insistence that his possibilities weren't something he could control. Maybe it's not about developing these abilities through practice or willpower, but rather cultivating a state of being,
Yeah.
a receptivity that allows them to manifest.
If we consider his concept of sublime consciousness,
Right.
it wasn't just a technique. It was a way of life.
Right.
He emphasized things like humility,
Yeah.
compassion, and service to others.
Okay.
Maybe those qualities are integral to accessing this deeper level of reality,
Right.
this interconnectedness he seemed to embody.
So instead of asking, how did Roll do it? Maybe the more relevant question is, what can we learn from his story? How can we cultivate those qualities within ourselves?
Yeah.
Not to become paranormal superheroes,
Right.
but to live more meaningful, connected lives.
Well, that's a question worth pondering, isn't it?
It is.
It shifts the focus from the spectacle of the extraordinary to the potential within each of us.
Right.
Maybe that's Roll's true legacy.
Not the baffling anecdotes, but the invitation to explore the hidden depths of our own being.
And this brings us back to you, our listener.
Right.
What resonates with you most about Roll's story? Does it spark curiosity,
Yeah.
skepticism, maybe even a sense of wonder?
Right.
What questions are you left with? What new paths of inquiry have been opened?
Remember, this deep dive has only scratched the surface.
Okay.
The sources we've explored offer a wealth of detail. And there are countless other books, articles, and accounts out there
Right.
for those who want to delve deeper into the enigma of Gustavo Adolfo Rol.
So we encourage you to continue the exploration, read the sources we've used,
Right.
seek out different perspectives.
And most importantly, engage with this material critically,
Okay.
thoughtfully, and with a sense of open-minded curiosity.
Because in the end, the real value of exploring these mysteries lies not in finding definitive answers, but in expanding our sense of what's possible.
And deepening our understanding of ourselves and the universe we inhabit.
I agree.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life and possibilities of Gustavo Adolfo Rol.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this has been a thought-provoking journey into the realm of the unexplained and an inspiration to continue exploring the mysteries that lie beyond the boundaries of our current understanding.